This is Dave, aka the Guru, and another tutorial using GameSalad. In this video, we're going to go ahead and look at the new function well, actually it is a function, but the new random seed integer attribute that was added up here. Now we know that in builds that are currently available, the random function isn't as consistent as it should be as far as generating random number sequences. So they've updated the algorithm that does random number generation, and they've also added this random scene attribute that can be handy to use in a variety of instances. So let's just go ahead, and I'm just going to make an actor over here. This is a demo that Hopscotch did for me at my request. He was kind enough to do this for me because I was having a hard time getting my head around what exactly the random seed attribute, how it all worked together. And they didn't give us a whole lot of explanation on it, but Ed Hopscotch is a very good coder outside of GameSalad as well. He's a technology person, and so I leaned on him for this. And so basically what I was missing was that, and let me just grab a change attribute so I can grab a function here. So basically what's going on here is that seed, that random seed, actually behind the scenes affects the random expression or the random function that we call when we want to randomize a series of numbers. And that's the connection of the dots that I wasn't making, that Hopscotch helped me understand. And so now that I understand how this happens, it took me a little bit to kind of figure out how it works in GameSalad. So when you come into GameSalad as a default, you're going to see this random seed is a -1 value. So now the -1 value will essentially give you a list or repeating series of numbers. So every time you every cycle or every time you reinstitute a random call on a series of numbers, it will mix them up when this is set to -1. Now you can also plant a seed in here to mix up or consistently pull a series of random numbers similarly by changing this value. So let's look at it, and then we'll look at a little bit how we do that. It's pretty abstract. It took me a little bit to get my head around it, so let me see if I can do my best to help explain this. So let's just go to the preview of this nice little template here that Hopscotch did for me. So let me just change, let me get rid of this. So let me just change something in this actor here. So I got 1, 2, and then I'm changing that random seed. Okay. So now let me show you what I'm going to do. So in this code here, what I'm going to do is manipulate that variable that I just showed you, the random seed variable. So I've got this little display text. It's going to show me what the random seed state, what the value is in there. So when I touch this little actor, I'm going to go ahead and up my little variable that's going to control what I'm doing in changing the state of the random seed here. And so in the first two, I'm using constraints, and then in the last one, I'm going to use a change attribute, and I'll explain to you why. So right now we have let me preview this. So right now what I've got is I'm constraining the random seed to the seed number. So in this, what we're doing is, let me grab this. This is going to spawn some stuff and give us an output. So you can see in here that we're just basically displaying text we're calling a random number 1 through 20, and then it's going to display on each draw because there's a loop behavior that'll spawn a series of numbers. So on each draw, it will go ahead, and as it loops, it'll pick a random number from 1 to 20 and then display them in a list in each row here that Hopscotch has set up for me. So right now I have the random seed value set at 5. So I'm going to say, okay, go ahead and start with this number. And from this sequence with a value of 5, go ahead and pull from a series of numbers. So let's go ahead and just click a series of numbers. So you're going to see I've got a series of random numbers, and I'm seeding it with the number 5. So if I click it again, I'm going to get the exact same series because I'm constraining the seed to this value of 5. So it doesn't matter how many times I click it, I will continue to get this same randomized order on every draw that I pull from random in this value. So now watch these numbers: 12, 14, 13, 17, 8, 18, 16. Okay, let me refresh this would be simulating up here a scene reset or even a game reset. And let me go ahead and click, and so you're going to see I'm getting the same. Okay, 12, 14, 13, 17, 12, 14, 13, 17. So I'm getting the same with my seed. And the reason why I have to constrain it is because on each draw, it will go ahead and reorganize the numbers, and it'll hit that attribute on each draw that I call for a random. And if I don't constrain it, it will keep drawing different numbers after that. It won't. You can't just set this and then have it be consistent. You have to keep it at the particular seed that you want for each draw. So the best way and the simplest way to do that is to use a constrain to keep that number in there tight. And then what that'll do is every time you make a call in a level, it'll give you a random sequence. Now, what's nice about this is that, let's say in game theory, okay, when we're doing a level for let's say a shooter up game or a some kind of platformer or whatever, where we have enemies, okay, and usually, like if you played Super Mario Brothers or you played any kind of like Galaga or any of those kind of games with patterns, and most games do have patterns, what game theory teaches you is that what players are really interested in are consistent patterns. Consistent patterns that are mixed up enough for there to be a learning curve for the player to kind of eventually figure out what's going on. And so if you play a game like Tomb Raider, let's say, where you have a series of obstacles, and every level, every time you play the game, the obstacle that you encounter is going to have the same values. They're not going to change it up on you every time you refresh the scene. They're not going to play the shell game with you. They're not going to keep moving things around, because in game theory, what attracts players to conquering a level is figuring out the pattern that's there, and then once they've figured it out, they can execute the level and finish it. So in your levels, if you're constantly doing a random function with your enemies and you're changing them every time the scene resets to another kind of completely different pattern, that goes against game theory in equating to player satisfaction. So in essence, by doing that, you're actually discouraging the player to keep playing your game and not encouraging them to keep playing your game. And so by having this function where we can now have a random seed, and that we can let the computer generate a series of random numbers for us, we can keep our levels as far as how our enemies spawn and such consistent across the level every time the player goes into that level. And so you can have all your code. Let's say the brilliance of this is usually when we would when we would have multiple levels, right, we would have to go and say we wanted to do this the old-fashioned way, that you understood that you need to keep your patterns the same. And so you would go in and you would design level 1, and you would, do your random number sequence or whatever. And then, you would make your level 2. And instead of having to rewrite, you would have to essentially rewrite or modify or have a table with all these values, and then change the row that you're calling to, which would be another attribute and all this stuff. And you would essentially be, modifying that next level. And then when you do the next level, you modify that. And then when you do the next level, you're modifying that. And you're modifying all this code that you've already built. Well, with this new random seed, you can build one set of code that is going to randomize all these things, that you can just link these numbers, 13, 17, whatever, into certain sets of logic. And then you can go ahead and say on level 2, I can just go ahead and change the seed and constrain it now to 10. So now what you're going to see is I'm going to get a consistent pattern, but now the pattern is going to be completely different. So now essentially what this does is this allows me to easily set up a consistency amongst each one of my levels in how my actors are spawning or how my enemies are spawning, and whatever you've got going on, in a consistent pattern every time the player plays the level. And this is going to lead to, in game theory, it's well known, if any game you play with enemies, that if you played yourself, you look for the patterns. And so now what this does is it allows us to easily change our levels randomness and yet keep it consistent every time for each individual level for the player. And then as well, if we want to go ahead, let me clear this out. If we want to go ahead, and I'll just do a couple. So if we wanted it to just be completely random, so if you're doing a slot machine game or something like that, where you really want things to be mixed up every time, where it's more of a game of chance than it is players figuring out a pattern, you would just go ahead, and I'm going to click this, and you're going to see now it's going to change this attribute. And I'm not doing a constrain, because if I did a constrain, this is still going to be a -1, so it's still a value. So if I'm holding the value, it would still give me a series of numbers that are the same. But if I just allow it to be -1, just change it back to -1 and just leave it there, and don't constrain any other numbers to it, and just set it to -1 and let it do, what you're going to see is I'm going to get completely random sets of numbers now every time I do a call for that random sequence of 1 through 20. So you wouldn't want to constrain the value, because you want every draw to be looking at this -1. If I were to constrain it to -1, then it's going to give me a consistent pattern, because the seed is now going to become -1. If I just leave it naked, set to -1, just do a change attribute, change it to, or switch it to -1, now it will give me a series of random numbers every time I call it without constraining it. And so when you have it set to naked -1 up there by default, this is what it's going to do. And so if you want to go ahead and do fixed numbers, you would do what I showed you in there, and you would just want to have some kind of rule there, like I created here, where I'm holding the value with a constraint to that number, so that every draw cycle, this is a fixed seed, and every time it will give me that number. So just make sure that this constraint attribute here in your manager, you want to have this in your manager or whatever, so that it is, as we know how code scans in GameSalad, it scans in the layers from bottom to top. So if you know what you're doing in GameSalad, you're always having your game manager that's off to the side, a little actor that we put code that's usually relevant to the game mechanics. We always have that at the head of the code cycle. That way we can make sure that the manager does the duties of changing any particular code that everything up above going this way needs to read. If we're changing the seed, if we're fixing the seed, at a point where I didn't have it this way, because I actually had I'm actually constraining it, and then I'm pushing, so I'm giving it doesn't actually pull the random 1 through 20 till I touch that little text. So in this case, I could have it anywhere because I'm giving the code a chance to scan, and then I'm going ahead and pressing it. But if you're automating this, then you would want to go ahead and make sure this is at the head of your scene, so that gets constrained right away before the rest of your code starts to fire and starts to draw a random set of numbers in there. And you could also just delay whatever starting or whatever in your code, but just to be safe, I always like to put things at the head of stuff, especially if in game you were going to modify, say you had a second wave and you wanted to change that random number, so you would want to go ahead and have that at the head if you were doing it. Now, one of the things that GS says is don't get all crazy readjusting this number a lot. You want to be frugal with it, and you can just, because it will have a performance degrade if you're changing this thing every 0.5 seconds or something like that, or every 20 seconds or whatever. You want to be frugal with it, use it properly. If you see a downgrade in performance of things spawning and stuff, then you're going to you want to watch. You may be modulating in this random seed variable too much. But this is a great new addition, and I'm sure people will. I'm just showing you like kind of the base ways how to use it here, but I'm sure that people will figure out some other clever things that haven't been thought of yet, what to do with this random seed generator. So I hope I've been clear, and I hope that I've helped explain this to you in a clear way that you can understand, and hopefully as well giving you a baseline of understanding of how a practical application of how you might use this in your game, and then you can build it out from there, figuring out, experimenting with it, and playing with it. So anyways, this is Dave, the Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.